Hey guys, thanks for joining us here at Salty Ginger Talk. If you're a returning listener, it's great to have you back. If you're new to the channel, we're glad you're here. We hope you like it. Our podcast is for people that want to learn something new or make themselves a little bit better. So, we spent a lot of time talking about personal accountability, controlling our emotions, being very deliberate in our approach to gathering facts, solving problems, and showing leadership in the interactions we have with people when we interact with them out in the real world. So, today's episode, we're going to talk about 3 Stoic habits to transform your everyday life. And we wanted to boil it down to concrete, actionable habits that you could incorporate into your everyday life that will be helpful for you just to improve how you feel, how you think about things, how you interact with people, deliver better outcomes when you problem solve, when you interact with other people. So that's what the episode is today. So, what is Stoicism? Stoicism is really a philosophy that originated way back with ancient Roman, a lot of emperors and philosophers believed in the Stoicism. Stoicism is really, we think about the key principle of Stoicism is you don't control what happens to you, but you control how you react what happens to you. And we have control over how we think about those things. We have control over the judgments we make. We have control over how we express those thoughts and feelings and emotions to the world. And that's where we want to spend our time. So we didn't know about Stoicism formally for quite a while, but we've actually practiced some of the concepts of Stoicism in our everyday life, going way back to the days when we were playing competitive sports. So when you're in a tense situation, and so for example, I was a closer sometimes, and you would go into a game where there was 3 or 4 thousand people that were screaming at you and wanted you to fail, and it was a very close game because the closer only plays in close games, and it's a very high pressure, tense situation. And so we didn't have control over a lot of things. I didn't have control over the umpire calling the pitch a ball or a strike. I didn't have control over a bad bounce if somebody hit a ground ball and it took one. I didn't have control over what those fans were yelling at me, but I did have control over my focus, over my effort, over my intensity, and being able to block all those other things out and only focus on the things I had control over. And so I think that's a good example of how Stoicism can be used in your everyday life to really kind of filter your reactions to the things that happen in your everyday life. So, with that said, we're going to cover 3 concepts today, or 3 habits that you can incorporate into your everyday life from the thought process, or the philosophy of Stoicism that you can use. And the first one we've actually already talked about, and to us, this is by far the most important one. And the first concept is focus on what you can control. There are so many things that are beyond your control. You can't control whether the light in front of you turns red right when you get to it. You can't control if somebody's driving slowly in front of you when you're late. You can't control if things at your work change and you have to abandon a project that you've been working on for a long time and quickly pivot to another project. You can't control if something bad happens to your spouse, to one of your children, to somebody you care about. But you can control how you react to those situations. So, other people's opinions, external events, you don't have any control over those things. And if you focus on things that you don't have control over, that's generally where anxiety and fear and trepidation come in, is because you know you don't have control over it. The other thing that can happen is you do know you have control over it and you're refusing to exercise or take that control. That's another kind of disconnect that manifests itself in negative thought processes, in procrastination, in avoidance, in lashing out. All of those are behaviors that show you know something is wrong and you're not doing a good job of taking a useful approach to solving whatever that problem is. So there's a quote from Marcus Aurelius on this: you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. And what he's saying there is what we're talking about. You have control over how you process the world. You have control over how you think about things. You don't have control a lot of times over what happens in the world you're living in, or outside events that impact you both positive and negative. So it's a huge waste of time and energy and resources to spend any time worried about or thinking about those outside events in a negative way because you can't control those things. You don't have any way to control those things. What you do have control over is how you process it and how you react to those events. So here's an example. At work, focus on delivering your best effort on a project rather than obsessing about how it's going to be received once you turn it in. Like, you don't have control over people's reactions to things. You don't have control over how they process that information. To the extent that you do have control, it's by doing a really good job, by being really well prepared, by hitting your deadlines, by making sure all the details are correct, by really focusing on those things you have control over. That's your best chance to influence how other people process or think about those things. But you really don't have control over how people process or think about those things, other than doing really high quality work and being very dependable. So that's where you want to spend your time and effort, rather than obsessing over, oh, I hope I don't get in trouble. I hope this goes well. I hope my boss likes it. Get it? Like, all of those things are normal and natural, but they're not productive. You don't have control over them, so you can't spend time thinking about those things or trying to impact those things. Where you want to spend your time is on what you have control over, which is doing a really good job on your project and really killing it when you make the presentation. So that's a good example of focusing on things you have control over and ignoring the things that you don't. So how can you do that? Let's say that that's challenging for you. Let's say you wind up obsessing about what other people think a lot, or negative feedback a lot, or being afraid of those kinds of things. What can you do? Make a chart. Literally make a chart. Draw a line across the top of the paper and one line down the middle, and everything on the left are things I have control over, and everything on the right are things I do not have control over. And write down situations that cause stress and categorize them in, I don't have control over it, so I've got to quit worrying about it. I do have control over it. How am I going to take control over it? So that's a good exercise to go through, because it really makes you focus on and ask yourself the question, do I have control over this? If you do, it goes in the I have control column, and you should put a plan together on what you're going to do. If you don't, it goes in the I don't have control over it. I'm going to be prepared for it when it happens, but I'm not going to react to it because there's nothing I can do about it. And I'm not going to waste a lot of time and energy on reacting to it because I can't change it anyways. So I'm not going to waste that time and energy on it. Another thing you can do as it relates to focusing on things you can control is do a morning check-in. Think about it every morning. What do I have today that I have control over that I'm going to get done? And I'm not going to worry about the other stuff. You don't have control over the emergency phone call that comes in because something went wrong, and now you have to work on that. But if you start your day off with, okay, I know what I have control over. I know what I'm going to focus on. I know how I'm going to spend my time. Even if you have to pivot, which is very common in our world, I can tell you that. But if you're ready for that, if you've prepared and you know kind of in your mind, okay, I'm focusing on things I have control over, then it puts you in a very positive mindset to go attack those things. And then at the end of the day, another thing you can do is reflect on one thing you let go of and how it made you feel. Like, just let it go. Let it go. Paul Tagliabue was the commissioner of the NFL during at least one of the labor stoppages in the 80s. The NFL had a strike. And I remember a great quote from Paul Tagliabue. It's always stuck with me. And the quote was, "All's well that ends." Like, it was over. Like, in his mind, he just needed to get it over, regardless of whether he was super happy with the deal, super unhappy with the deal. It was better for everybody to get that situation behind them and focus on the things they had control over in front of them. And when you think about that, letting go of things, you really need to focus on how impactful that is to you. You carry around so much baggage and so much dead weight, worrying about things you don't have control over. What happens when you let it go? Now you've got all the time and energy and resources that you were spending thinking about those things to apply towards things that you do have control over, and what a difference it's going to make in your world. We guarantee you'll feel better about it. So those are three, excuse me, three exercises that you can practice to really impact focusing on what you have control over. And to us, that's by far the most important concept of Stoicism. If you don't think about anything but that, just that alone will get you so far in the world. I don't have control over it. I'm going to let it go. Think about it that way. Okay, principle 2, habit 2. Practice voluntary discomfort every day. By embracing discomfort, you can build resilience and appreciate what you have. So Seneca was another Stoic philosopher from ancient Rome, and he said, set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare. Is this the condition that I feared? So if it's cold outside, if it's really cold outside, go outside for 5 minutes. Be uncomfortable for 5 minutes. You're not going to die being out in cold weather for 5 minutes. If it's super hot, go out for 5 minutes when it's super hot. If your house is nice and cozy and air conditioned, get out, make yourself uncomfortable, lift heavy weights, sprint down your street so that you're uncomfortable physically. Read something that's really hard to understand. Have a difficult conversation that you've been putting off. Put yourself in uncomfortable situations so that you can let that adversity teach you how to react to uncomfortable situations, how to keep your wits about you during uncomfortable situations, how to, excuse me, how to push through those uncomfortable situations and get the result that you want. You know, there's a lot of noise around whether a cold plunge, exposing yourself to really cold water every day is good for you or if it doesn't have any impact for you. But that's a good example of intentionally being uncomfortable every day. That's easy to practice. Take a cold shower, fast, skip a meal, force yourself to be uncomfortable for a little bit. And that way you can develop the mental strength and the mental toughness you need to push through challenges. So some steps you can take on this, a comfort zone challenge. Challenge yourself to get out of your comfort zone. We've got several examples here. Skip your morning coffee, walk instead of drive, take the stairs instead of the escalator or the elevator. There's lots of ways you can make yourself less comfortable than you were. Stand and watch TV instead of sitting and watch TV. Maybe you say, I'm only allowed to watch television if I'm on an exercise bike or if I'm walking around my living room. Force it to be less comfortable. Force yourself into discomfort, and it's going to do a world of good for your mental toughness. After experiencing the discomfort, list 3 things that you appreciate more as a result. You're going to feel better after you do these things. I can tell you that after we do a heavy lift or a hard run, it sucks while it's going on, but the sense of accomplishment we have after it's over with is super useful. And it's easy to say, oh, well, I don't want to do that, or I've got this, that, or the other, blah, blah, blah. Think about all the time you spend on social media, all the time you spend on binge watching television, all the time you spend on non-value added activities. You have time, you just choose to focus that time and use that time on things that aren't as helpful or aren't as productive for you. And when you do these hard things, it makes you appreciate your mental toughness. It makes you appreciate the sacrifice you made, and it makes you grateful for the things you do have in your life. And then the third step on this, the third tip on this is ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen? I've got a situation that I'm not super happy about or I'm concerned about. What's worst case scenario? What does it look like? And if you have worst case scenario in your head, you can reframe it and say, okay, so if that's the worst thing that happens, so what? Like if the worst thing that happens is you look stupid and people laugh at you, okay, that's happened to me lots. It's happened to me thousands of times in my life. It's happened to everybody thousands of times in their life. It's not the end of the world. You get over it. It goes away quickly. Quit worrying about it so much. But if you continuously put yourself in those situations and practice discomfort every day, it will go miles and miles towards helping you build a better life. And then the last one, and this is a little bit opposite because we hear a lot of people talk about positive visualization, We're saying practice negative visualization for a little bit. So imagine potential setbacks or losses so that you can be mentally prepared for them in the event that they happen. And it will help you appreciate what you do have, because if you think about it, and a negative from a worst case scenario, a negative perspective, it'll make you appreciate what you do have in your life. We see lots of movies like this, right? Where someone comes and magically trades places with somebody or sends them back in time or lets them have a glimpse of what life would look like if they'd never been born. There's multiple movie plots that show this. And it's exactly the same thing we're talking about here. Visualize negative things, negative concepts, so you're prepared for them if they happen, or at least you can start thinking about how to be prepared for them if they happen. Another quote here from Seneca: he robs present ills of their power who has perceived their coming beforehand. So if you're ready for the bad news doesn't sting so bad. It still sucks. It's still bad news. That's why we call it bad news. But if you've thought about it before and you're prepared for it, it hits you less impactfully. It hits you less hard. So as an example, visualize a tough conversation with a colleague and rehearsing how to respond calmly. I'm not going to get sucked in. I'm not going to react emotionally. I'm not going to name call. I'm not going to do things that I know I've done under duress before. But this time, I'm going to be prepared for this conversation. It's going to be productive. I'm going to be left brain. I'm going to be unemotional. I'm going to remain calm and level during the whole conversation. Visualize that happening. Watch it happen. So 3 steps here, 3 steps you can take to help practice this negative visualization. Spend 2 minutes imagining your day and any obstacles you might encounter. What could go wrong? What could happen? What could upset your apple cart today? Spend a couple of minutes right at the beginning of your day thinking through those things and be prepared for them if they happen. Number 2, gratitude expansion. So reflect on losing something that you take for granted and appreciate it deeply. Very easy to take it for granted. Very good things you have in your life. There's people, there's things, there's opportunities, there's feelings that you have every day that you might not be thinking through, and really being mindful. Hey, this is a really good deal. I'm lucky to have this in my life. Think about, what if it was gone? What if my life didn't have this involved? That would suck. And it makes you more grateful for having it in your life. And then step number 3 is write down a plan B. Have a separate plan. What if this happens? How am I going to react to it? What am I going to do if this actually happens? If worst case scenario happens, what's my out? What's my safety valve? What's my plan to deal with it if it does happen? So for a current goal or plan, you can outline how you'd handle a setback to reduce your stress level, to reduce your anxiety, to be prepared to handle it in a meaningful and productive way. So those are 3 steps you can take on the negative visualization to help you through that process. So that's it for today, guys. Just a quick summary of what we talked about. 3 Stoic habits that you can incorporate into your everyday life to make it better. Number 1, focus on what you can control. Very straightforward. Number 2, practice voluntary discomfort. Intentionally make yourself uncomfortable so that you can make yourself develop mental toughness to grind through hard situations and hard times. Number 3, use negative visualization so that you can be prepared for bad things when they happen. You've already thought about them, you've already considered it. So when it happens, it's not quite the slap in the face that it is if it hits you out of the blue when you're not looking. So would love to hear from you guys in the comments. If you practice any of these, if you've had experience using these things in your life, how do you focus on what you have control over and forget what you don't have control over, or let go of what you don't have control over? What do you do to make yourself uncomfortable? What type of sacrifices do you make or work do you do to improve your long-term life? Short-term pain, long-term gain, right? We've got an episode about delayed gratification. That's what we're talking about. Delay the gratification. Do the hard work now so that you have a bigger benefit somewhere down the road. And then 3rd, what's that negative visualization? What are you thinking about that could go wrong? Have your eye on what could be a problem, what could be a challenge. We had a saying when I played baseball that you celebrate on the bus. Doesn't matter how much you're up in the 9th inning, you don't celebrate until that last out is made, because nothing's guaranteed until that last out is made. But we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to, if you do, put it in the comments so the other listeners can see those things as well, and we can kind of talk through those things in the comments. It'd be a great way for us to use the community that we're building here to kind of talk through our challenges and how we deal with those. So James puts it up over here every day. Don't forget to head over to our website, saltygingertalk.com. All of our podcast episodes are available there. We've got links to all of our social media content there, and we publish a newsletter every weekday that you can subscribe to on our website as well. Also, it's great if you can like, comment, and subscribe to our podcast on whatever platform you consume it on. This episode will air on Friday, so everybody have a great weekend. We appreciate you checking out the channel. We look forward to seeing you back here next week.